Okay, we are ready to start the meeting.
All right, thank you. So I would like to call to order the June 22nd, 2020 Lake Washington School District Board of Directors Board meeting. And our first item, I'd like to first announce that all individuals are participating remotely, all 5 board members. And the board meeting is live streamed and is viewable on our district website. If you aren't able to view the live stream, you could call 425-936-2805 or 425-936-2809, conference ID of 471683. So thank you very much. And with that, our first item on the agenda is to approve our agenda.
Move approval. Second.
It's been moved by Director Carlson and seconded by Director LaLiberty to approve the agenda. All those in favor, please signify by voting aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. So the first item on the agenda, actually, back in January when we adopted our new policies, we actually had shifted when the board reorganization took place in regards to the president, vice president, and legislative rep. And the agreement was that we would do it at the second meeting in June. And this is now the second meeting in June. So for this evening, we do have the reorganization of the board at this point in time. And as a first step, I will turn over this meeting to our superintendent in which to be able to conduct that.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. And just as a reminder, the reason why the board changed that was so that the board roles would follow a full calendar year of a school district, and things like legislative sessions. The old model with the dates were kind of colliding with happening in the middle of things, middle of a large district project, middle of legislative session, middle of budget cycle, and so that was part of the reason why the board changed to this meeting time. So tonight there are 3 positions open, and I get to hold the temporary chair position until the president is elected. The process will be to call for nominations and then to declare the nominations closed. So with that, nominations are now open for president of the Lake Washington School Board.
I nominate Eric LaLiberty for president.
Eric LaLiberty has been nominated for the president of the Lake Washington School Board, and nominations actually do not need a second. So are there any other nominations for the president of the board? Okay, hearing none, I declare the nominations to be closed. There has been 1 nomination for president, and that is Eric LaLiberty. We will do a roll call vote, and so I will begin with Director Sage.
Yes.
Director LaLiberty.
Yeah.
Director Carlson.
Yes.
Director Stewart.
Yes.
And Director Bleasner.
Yes.
Eric LaLiberty is therefore elected by unanimous vote to be president. Congratulations, Eric. And now I will take the chair position and pass it over to you to now elect a vice president.
The next on our agenda is to elect a vice president of the board, and nominations are now open for vice president of the board. And I actually have not read the rules. Am I allowed to nominate somebody as president? Do we have a ruling on that?
Chris Carlson actually has his hand raised.
Oh my God.
Sorry, you'll get the knack of it. Mark Stewart.
Did you hear it?
Sorry. Mark Stewart has been Mark Stewart has been nominated for vice president of the board. Are there any other nominations for vice president of the board? As there are no other nominations for vice president of the board, I declare the nominations closed. There's been 1 nomination for vice president, and that is Mark Stewart. We will do a roll call vote. Director Sage?
Yes.
Director Carlson?
Yes.
Director Stewart? Yes. Director Bleasner?
Yes.
And myself, yes. Mark Stewart is elected by unanimous vote to be vice president for the next year. The last position for the board tonight is the legislative representative. Nominations are now open for legislative representative of the board. Director Carlson?
I nominate Cassandra Sage, Director Sage.
Cassandra Sage has been nominated for legislative representative of the board. Are there any other nominations for legislative representative? Okay, as there are no other nominations for legislative representative of the board, I declare the nominations to be closed. There has been one nomination for legislative representative, and that is Director Sage. We will now do a roll call vote. Director Carlson?
Yes.
Director Stewart?
Yes.
Director Poliesner?
Yes.
Director Sage?
I'm going to have to say yes to this one, I guess. Yes.
And myself, yes. Director Sage is elected by unanimous vote to be the legislative representative for the next year. Thank you all. All right, the next item on our agenda for tonight is public comment. Due to current restrictions, there is no in-person public comment for social distancing. All public comments should be submitted in writing to Diane Jenkins at djenkins@lwsd.org by 3 p.m. on the date of the board meeting. At this time, I will ask the board members and I will read the public comments received for the June 22nd board meeting. The board has received a significant number of emails for public comment tonight regarding the Juanita High School mascot and inclusion and support of Black students and staff in our district. Per our policy, we will limit the reading of public comment tonight to 30 minutes, and we will allocate time between the different topic areas for which we receive public comment. Even if your public comment is not read aloud tonight, the board has received all public comment, as well as literally hundreds of emails in the last 2 weeks, and the board will be reviewing all public comment, and it will be part of the record. I will start by the first topic for which we received public comment. I will start by reading the first letter we received. The first topic is on inclusion and support of Black students and staff. And the letter I will be reading is from Katie Badger, the Lake Washington Education Association Executive Committee. Badger wrote, "As members of the executive board, we speak on behalf of the Lake Washington Education Association membership. A change long overdue is occurring in our country. The district is obligated as a public institution to lead our community towards equity and justice, now and in the future. Crucially, in this effort, the board of directors and district leadership must dedicate resources to combating institutional racism through concrete, defined, and immediate actions to address racial discrimination and racial bias that exists in our schools. Black students and their families, Black community members, and Black employees of LWSD deserve to know that their lives, their safety, their well-being, their work, their futures, and their success are valued by the district. And that the district is committed to this work in defined, measurable, and actionable ways through budgeting, policies and practices, training, hiring, curriculum, and communication. The district's budget reflects its priorities, and that budget should change as priorities change. LWSD must make their own commitment to racial equity and justice obvious so that it becomes cultural. LWEA demands that the board of directors and district leadership take the following steps immediately to address systemic racial inequity, racial discrimination, and racism that exists in our schools. Implement Black Lives Matters at School Week at all LWSD schools. Adopt a budget that clearly prioritizes equity work in our district, including paid racial equity work. Make the district's equity page on the LWSD website more visible and ensure that it includes our strategic plan for equity work, particularly racial equity work, and resources for educators, district employees, and students and parents to help them grow in the understanding of racial injustice and other systems of oppression such as class, sexuality, ability, religion, gender, and identity. Conduct a full racial equity audit biannually of the district office and all school buildings to bring to light ways in which white supremacy culture is being perpetuated by any of our institutional practices. The results of each racial equity audit must be published on the district equity page and used to create a racial equity improvement plan. Create a plan to implement mandatory ongoing training on racial equity and bias to be completed every year by all staff. The training plan, which must be published by September 2020 on the equity page, must be developed in partnership with the school equity teams to include a robust and fully funded budget and timeline for development and implementation in the next school year. The training must be reviewed annually by the district equity team using equity audit results. Adopt a school board racial equity policy and procedure to redress racial equity conflicts, which includes independent investigations of reported incidents of racial bias or harassment and mandatory racial equity training for employees and students found to have engaged in racial discrimination. The district equity team has drafted such a policy already. Review current district curriculum and grades preschool through 12 for existing ethnic studies and diversity components. By January 2021, implement ethnic studies as a required curricular component for grades 7 through 12 and integrate racial equity social justice standards into the curriculum for grades preschool through 12 on all subjects. Emphasize and prioritize diversity in hiring, including efforts to recruit, hire, and retain diverse district-level leadership, recruit, hire, and retain diverse educators and other staff through programs like micro-credentialing, include equity training as a prerequisite for hiring, and add racial equity knowledge as a component of hiring through the use of interview questions. Implement immediately de-escalation training for school security staff and any staff involved in student supervision. Defund the SRO program in schools and reallocate these funds to social, emotional, and health needs of students. LWEA stands ready to collaborate with the district in prioritizing racial equity work, dismantling racial prejudice, and calling out white supremacy culture in our schools. This work cannot wait for a better time or more funding. We cannot expect someone else to address these issues. We must act now and sustain our work going forward. This will require both direction from the board of directors and a partnership between LWSD, and LWA. And again, that was a comment we received from Katie Badger of the Lake Washington Education Association. So I'll now pass it to Director Belizner to read the next comment. I think we'll go in the order received for this topic for another 5 minutes.
So the next we have is from Dana Sim, LWSD teacher and parent. LWSD proudly proclaims its interest in academic success and community involvement. It's relatively easy to give a statement like Black Lives Matter and move on. It's much harder and more fruitful and necessary to put words into actions. So please support our educators in elevating Black staff and student voices by requiring that Black history and ethnic studies be taught. It is part of our American and world history. My classes never mentioned functioning Black communities, African cultures, or Juneteenth. How many other hidden figures should we choose to not show our students? Changing methodology for all teachers, for all staff, teachers, classified workers, and administrators to more culturally affirming based practices. We have strong communities of color, of non-Christian religions, of immigrants. Their voices should be part of our classes. Training all staff how to hold conversations around race, class, ability, and other societally minoritized statuses. This skill should not be expected to reside only with teachers of color. These conversations should be happening at all ages, especially elementary. Searching out and consciously supporting more staff of color in all of our buildings. Washington is predominantly white, but our area and our students are not. Our staffing should reflect that reality. And lastly, removing police from our buildings. While I, a white woman, have favorable interactions with officers, they are a source of tension and fear with many of our students and staff. No one should feel unsafe at school. Instead, have that money move towards student health and social work. It would be incredible if, instead of following the Seattle Metro districts as usual, LWSD were able to help lead the way in creating these kinds of actions and spaces.
Oh, Cassandra, you're on mute.
Well, that would have been boring, sorry. The next public comment was submitted by Katie White, a Redmond High School teacher. I hope you will seek feedback from our communities of color during this process. Rather than assuming you know best as the people in power, it is your responsibility to reach out to the people who understand these issues from firsthand personal experience. It can be frightening and awkward because you will have to face criticism and reflect on your blind spots. However, that difficult process is truly our only way forward. Therefore, I hope you make it a priority to proactively seek to build relationships with the communities of color in LWSD and open yourselves to vulnerable conversations and reflections on how we can best serve our families.
And Mark, I think you're the next
Yeah,
one.
Director Stewart, would you mind reading the next one?
For Larry Finnerty, I only have the three, and I have a fourth for that group. My next one is the mascots. I have in my email.
Okay, I guess Director Carlson, do you have in front of you some of the public comments we received on inclusion? And would you mind reading the next one?
I queued up on that one. Okay, so this is from Leanne Floss, Library Media Specialist. Thank you for looking out for the needs of students and staff in our district. Your task is not an easy one. As part of this continued work, I would like to advocate for the acceptance of the demands presented by the equity letter submitted by the LWEA. We have a very diverse population of students. However, as a system, we are very colorblind and dismissive of the challenges associated with racial issues. Teachers are passionate about reaching all students, but we cannot do without systemic support. As a teacher in the district, I'd like to expand on the curriculum demands made by the LWEA. I specifically request that our history curriculum, all levels, be updated so that it reflects U.S. history accurately. Unfortunately, many of our staff, including myself, were taught a starkly inaccurate U.S. history that glorified white male accomplishments while ignoring the uglier side of history, particularly Black and African American history. This pattern can no longer be allowed to continue if we want to break the cycle of systemic racism. I would also like to add on to the LWEA demands for staff training. This training needs to be meaningful. There's a danger in yearly trainings becoming a checkbox like many of the other yearly trainings we do. This cannot happen. We need to make sure these trainings are accompanied with discussions so we can truly understand one another's needs. We also need to have modeling and direct examples of how to integrate this training and knowledge into our classrooms. It does not matter how much training is provided if there is no follow-up and support for integration into our daily practice. Thank you for listening to all of our comment. And then it goes to Gregory Thatcher. Are you queued, Mark, or? It didn't. Yeah, no, I hear you. You're muted, but your facial expression says it all.
So I think we will move to the next topic to make sure we stay within our time constraints for tonight. But I will read aloud the names of all those who else we received public comment from for tonight. Gregory Thatcher, Joy Randall, Renee Ferguson George, Kim Haber, Kristen Doherty and Julie Bergevin, Kim Haber, Rochelle Horner, Mary Zell Galarp, I apologize on the pronunciation, Crystal Vesperis, Emma Haskin, Melanie Miller, Molly Wilson, Tara Pozo, Elizabeth Prowl, Cleo Roan, Colin Tracy, Kayla Thompson, John Norris, Kate Wood, Matt Austin, Sheila Hodgins, Mary Ellen Olafson, Sherry Cabore, Karen Musk, Christina DeVidal, and Greta Clymer. Thank you all who took the time to submit public comment and who have written to the board. I wrote to the board in the last several weeks. We were not able to read aloud all of the numerous public comments we received tonight, but the board has those comments and we'll be reading them. So I'd like to move with the other set of topic, the other topic for which we received a significant amount of public comment was the Juanita High School mascot. Director Stewart, are you able to read one of those public comments that we received? Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry. I have Libby Finnerty as the first letter in my list. Does that work for you, Eric?
Yes, that's the first letter I have too.
Okay, good. Former LWSD student and community member. It has come to my attention that the mascot at Juanita High School is racist. This is completely unacceptable and has no place in society, let alone our schools. The rebel, as you may know, is a symbol of the Confederacy and the preservation of slavery. It is my understanding that there was a vote by students to change the mascot in 2018, but did not pass. This is an administration decision. An administration that does not stand for equity and denounce racism does not deserve to continue to serve in our schools. I implore you to do the right thing. Change Juanita High School's mascot immediately and show your support to the students and the citizens of color. End of letter.
Next, I am going to read a collective letter that we received from students from Juanita High School. It was sent in by Megan Wong, but it is signed by roughly 20 students from Juanita High School. My name is Megan Wong, and I am a graduating senior at Juanita High School. A group of current JHS students and I have written a collective letter regarding Juanita High School's mascot change to be read at the LWSD Board of Director meeting. We hope the board is able to discuss its contents at the meeting, as we believe the voices of the current student body are central to this issue. Every day in the halls of Juanita High School, one hears phrases like "Go Rebs" and "Rebel Pride." Juanita's rebel mascot is intrinsically tied to the Confederates of the Civil War, a group of states that fought to keep the legal enslavement of black people. We are calling for the mascot to be removed immediately, as it does not represent Juanita High School and the values we, the students of Juanita, stand for. We urge the board to recognize and act upon the following points. 1, the rebel mascot can no longer be tolerated. The board's tacit support of it directly contradicts their own June 1st statement on racial equity. 2, the board has the power and the responsibility to remove the mascot immediately. Tradition is an insufficient reason to cling to an outdated and racially insensitive mascot. While Juanita can vote for a new mascot next year, the rebel mascot falls outside of the normal range of mascots that the regular name change policy is designed to address. Juanita's website argues that the school is a, quote, rebel in the sense that it broke the educational norms as part of the 1960s educational change. School spirit has always run deep in Juanita's hallways, but there's a darker side to be informed of. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, the Confederate battle flag was first popularized in response to calls for racial equality from the civil rights movement. It is in this context that the rebel mascot was first voted on by Juanita students in 1971. Students were deciding between two mascots, the Eagles, a common motif of freedom, pride, and strength, or a rebel as a nod to the American Revolution. This according to the school district. The administration failed to acknowledge that soldiers of the Revolutionary War were referred to as patriots rather than rebels. Juanita's association with the Confederacy includes, in 1986, the table of contents of Juanita's yearbook proudly flaunted an image of students at a football game with Confederate flags painted on their faces and a physical Confederate flag waved behind them. In the 1990 edition of the Juanita High School yearbook, the front cover featured the Confederate flag. And as recently as 2011, an art teacher made a symbol for student spirit gear that was based on a Confederate soldier. There are many other examples we can include. In the board's June 1st statement regarding racial inequalities within our community, the board stated, "We believe that the lives of Black people do matter. We believe that it is our responsibility to condemn and speak out against discrimination, hate, and racism." However, this statement remains insincere as long as a blatantly racist symbol continues to represent over 1,700 students and 100 staff members each passing year, as well as Juanita's alumni and general community. By choosing to remain silent on this issue, the board is ignoring the decades of harm that Juanita's mascot has inflicted on our Black students, staff, and community members. This is, in their own words, implicitly saying that the lives of Black people are less than or do not matter. The name change policy that the board created in 2018 was flawed. It is inappropriate to place the students in charge of deciding whether a racist mascot should be removed, especially when the school is 55% white and 3.4% Black. The majority white population of Juanita vastly outnumbered the people directly impacted by the mascot, meaning the Black community was sidelined in an issue that should feature them, perpetuating the systemic racism that our school district is vocally against. Additionally, students were not properly educated on the issue prior to voting. Teachers and staff were barred from partaking in the discussion of the mascot, further perpetuating ignorance. Students were not educated on our country's relationship with racism and were therefore ill-equipped to understand the meaning and history of the rebel mascot. The single fact sheet that students were presented hardly addressed the racist history behind the mascot, nor the implications it holds in today's society. Because the mascot represents all of Juanita High School, as well as the general community, only allowing the voices of current students was unfair and unreasonable. Peer pressure mounted to side with tradition. By pushing the issue onto students, the district avoided responsibility and acted as a bystander to racial injustice. This vote was a deflection of culpability onto Juanita's student body. Given the, quote, change versus no change of this vote, it was a given that most student body would side the status quo. Call to action. The needless deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and countless other Black lives due to systemically flawed police system only underscores the issues found in all American institutions, including education. While calls to change the mascot may be new, the racist nature of the mascot is not. Due to the rebels' links to the Confederacy and racial connotation, the LWSD board cannot allow the mascot to remain standing. The board's June 1st statement reads that we understand as a board that silence is comforting for some and deafening for others. We understand that silence is also complicity. We believe that it is our responsibility to condemn and speak out against discrimination, hate, and racism. The board's tacit support for this mascot directly contradicts their own commitment to condemn hate and racism. The rebel mascot is clearly inappropriate, and it falls outside the normal range of mascots that the regular name change policy is designed to address. The board has both the power and the responsibility to get rid of this mascot. We call upon you to remove the rebel mascot from the Juanita High School. Upon its removal, we as a student body will vote to choose an appropriate new mascot to represent Juanita High School. We appreciate your time. And it's signed by, collectively signed by 20 Juanita High School students. Director Belizner, would you please read another public comment?
Yes, next one is Teresa Harrington, Juanita High School class of 88 and parent of a Juanita High School class of 2018, 2020, and 2022. As Juanita High School alumni parent and current PTSA board member, I am writing to share my thoughts on the JSS mascot issue. At this moment in time, it seems like no matter how you felt about the mascot in the past, no matter what the original intent of the name and logo were, the truth is, at some point, and this was true during my Juanita High School evidenced by the yearbook photo being used on the petition, the Confederate flag was brought in as an unofficial school symbol. Whether this was a sign of a giant blind spot in understanding of the painful legacy that the flag represents, an indictment of sanitized U.S. history curriculum, or an expression of outright prejudice and bigotry is unclear. What is clear is that at some point that flag and the Juanita rebels were associated. This is a fact, not an opinion. The intent and impact of that fact can be debated, but sadly that fact cannot be erased. We as a community, as alumni, students, parents, and PTSA members need to own and acknowledge that fact. It is hard, especially when a community has to acknowledge that their own ignorance and lack of understanding has caused fellow members of the community pain. Minority members of our community have clearly shared that the JHS mascot results in feelings of exclusion, threat, and danger. Ensuring that every student feels safe at school is or should be the first priority of school boards, administrators, teachers, and the PTSA. For that reason, this decision should not be a strictly student-led decision, as is current district policy. We don't leave other safety concerns up to a vote of the students. We also need to acknowledge that there may be many students, alumni, and parents who were against the change 2 years ago and are suddenly finding themselves in favor of it now. This is not necessarily a sign of hypocrisy. It can be a sign of growth. Taking in new information and context and allowing it to change your thinking is not hypocritical. It is the definition of education. My favorite quote from Maya Angelou is, "When you know better, do better." If we now know better, it is time to do better. The school board needs to provide leadership and policy to ensure that the school environment remains a welcoming and inclusive place for all. I was and am a proud Juanita Rebel and Rebel parent. The fact that there is now deep shame and pain associated with something that also gives me great pride is a difficult dialectic to reconcile. But when you think of it, a rebel, by definition, is an agent of change. We cannot uphold our rebel tradition without being open to change. Thank you for your consideration of this important issue.
Director Sage, would you read the next public comment we received?
I will. This was submitted by Grace Harrington, Juanita High School alumnus and future educator. I'm writing to you about your policy on changing a school's mascot. From my experience in classrooms as both a student and a teacher, I know, and I'm sure you are aware, of the impact a school environment can have on students and their ability to learn. In the case of your existing policy on changing a mascot by student vote only, and the Juanita High School mascot, you are failing to ensure your students can have a learning environment where they feel safe, heard, and valued. This policy needs to change to ensure the preservation of safe learning environments for all students and to recommit this district to racial justice in a time in our history where that is more vital than ever. The Juanita High School Rebel mascot is harmful to its student population and wider community. The way in which racist symbolism is intertwined with this mascot, the rallying point of an institution of learning, is unacceptable. Regardless of original intent, this mascot and what it has come to represent has created hostility and discomfort for students. This has no place in a school and is detrimental to creating an environment conducive to learning, one truly committed to student well-being. The change in policy and mascot is more than a suggestion. It is a matter of listening to and respecting the dignity of your students. All students deserve a learning environment where they feel safe. How else are they to learn without that? A matter of this weight that concerns student safety and ultimately students' ability to thrive in their school community should not be left up to only the votes of other students. As the people responsible for student education and safety, you must be involved, as this is a safety matter. This is a moment to learn and grow by challenging policy and taking action to protect students and create a school space where they know they can be heard and learn safely. I will end with this. Your district's mission states, students will graduate prepared to lead a rewarding, responsible life as a contributing member of our community and greater society. Well, I am a graduate of this district, and I am now using my voice to responsibly engage with and contribute to my community and our greater society. The other individuals speaking up and fighting for this change, many of whom are LWSD students, are fulfilling your mission. Now is the time to listen. Now is the time for action.
Director Carlson, would you please read the next public comment?
Yeah, so in the interest of providing balance, we received a large number of comments, and this is not taken in the order it was received. This is simply a representative of a small number of comments that we received who were not necessarily in favor of this. This is from Jennifer Loy. I was taken aback by seeing the media interview by the Juanita High School alum, Jaden M. I have a problem with the fact that she's actively promoting a false narrative. It and she infers that we have a problem that today the school is embracing the Confederate flag and repeatedly shows a logo and a yearbook photo from the late 80s or early 90s, King Pride in Cairo. There's not a mention of the changed imagery or logo, let alone showing it. There's no Confederate flag or reference being used at Juanita at all. She's literally calling for the school to denounce the Confederate flag. This makes no actual sense, but clearly will get someone's attention. I also saw the social media post to get out her petition. Old imagery and a false or outdated narrative is used to shock and then engender readers so that they are motivated to sign her petition. Many are signing based on lies and misrepresentations. She's using false pretenses to disparage the school, stoke unrest in the community, and misrepresent the current environment and students at Juanita to achieve her unrealized goal as a student. I realize many people would like to see the name Rebel changed for their own reasons, just like many would like to keep it the way it is. Like many words, they can have a positive and negative connotation. Juanita Rebels is used in a way to evoke a positive, competitive, and innovative connotation. Whatever way the chips fall here, it saddens me that this is the way this is going down. A move to end around the current students' vote by those with sour grapes because they didn't get their way 2 years ago. Of course, there will not be a loud counter, save the rebel group, as those who want to will be called racist. This is not a new group or a new set of people, let alone current students that have recently felt there was some injustice done to them because of the name rebel. This is exactly the same people who were voted down 2 years ago and no longer attend the school. That absolutely matters. You don't win every vote and you don't always get your way. You shouldn't think that you'll get to change the rules every time you lose a vote. If another vote happens, it should be championed by current students and voted on by current students alone. To take advantage and tie their failed mascot changing campaign in 2018 to a positive Black Lives Matter movement, bring negative and unwanted PR to the staff, students, and alumni at Juanita was not helpful. I don't think the Juanita student body is racist. I don't think being the rebels is racist. Using racism and the term racist to get your way is wrong. Bullying in all forms is also wrong. I hope that the school district sticks to the current policy for changing school logos and that the school board supports this. There's no evidence that some horrible injustice has recently happened to anyone because of the name Rebels, where parents, alumni, the district, or PTA members need to jump in right now and overrule the students. I hope that you will not cave to the mob looking for you to opportunistically hurry to change a policy based on a false narrative due to heightened emotion around a national issue that does not have anything to do with Juanita High School's Rebels name or the current school culture. That's the end of the comment. Eric, you're muted.
I am. Thank you, Director Carlson. I'm going to read the names of the other individuals who provided public comment on this issue, and then we'll move to the last issue for which we received public comment. Ella Dorwin, Hanako Mantooth, Kristen Dorwin, Kimberly Boss, Jenny Yeager, Jennifer Loy, Judy Field, Kirsten Larson, Reagan Boyson, Habib Rashbar, Jacqueline Davis, Jessica Marquez, Claire Vossler, Serena Hua, Carla Schneider, Tracy Wilhelm, Lynn Osborne, Ellie Vossler, Kelsey Field, Abby Main, Kara Stafford, Karen Gerard, Melissa Stone, Eric Main, Barbara Ramey, Diana Lafanora, Kay and David Stafford, Mariana Alvarez Tostado, and Carol Walker. The last issue on which we received public comment for tonight was on yes.
Just as a momentary comment, among all of those names, Ms. Loy is the only person who publicly asked us to read her comment against changing the name. The rest of them were in favor of changing the name.
Okay, thank you, Director Carlson. The last issue on which we received public comment is transcripts, and we received a letter from Diana LaFanora. Director Stewart, do you have that with you?
Yes, sir, I do.
Would you mind reading it?
I'd be pleased to. Not a problem. Again, Diana LaFanora, and she has also 2 documents referenced that are attached, but I'll read the letter. The high school transcripts of students in our district who are placed at non-public agencies different from those of other graduates in respects that make it clear they have received special education services, a clear equity and privacy issue. Specifically, the term, quote, contractual school, end quote, is on their transcripts, and their NPA classes, mandated under IEPs, are marked as transfer credits. These credits, in many cases, greatly exceed the number of transfer credits allowed by our school districts, by our district rules. An obvious indicator that this student has received special education and or related services. I've had multiple conversations with district staff as well as OSPI staff regarding this issue, and I was pleased to see a letter from Shannon Hitch that sent out last summer saying that our district was addressing those transcript issues in part, parens, letter attached in parens. This was a good first step, though in my view, an incomplete one. However, despite the span of time that has elapsed since that letter was sent, even the one change that was promised, removing, quote, contractual school, end quote, from transcript, has yet to be fully realized. The U.S. Department of Education Office of Civil Rights Dear Colleague letter, report cards and transcripts for students with disabilities, 2008, page 2, attached, concurs with my assertion. Quote, transcripts may not contain information disclosing students' disabilities. Transcripts are provided to persons other than the student and the student's parents to convey information about the student's academic credentials and achievements. Information about a student's disability, including whether the student received special education or related services due to having a disability, is not information about the student's academic credentials and achievements. Therefore, transcripts may not provide information on a student's disability. Please look into and correct this oversight with as much expedition as possible. We owe it to our graduates. End of the letter.
Thank you, Director Stewart.
Did you want to hear the attachments or not? Okay, go ahead.
I don't think we need to read the attachments, but we should note that we did receive them and the board has them to review.
Yes, yes.
Okay. Thank you all, the directors who shared the reading of public comment tonight. We received, I think, as long as I've been on the board, the most we've ever received for this meeting tonight. And while we did not have the time to read aloud all of them, the board has received and reviewed all of them. And thank you to everyone who took the time to write to the board. In particular, our students who took time out of their days at the end of the academic year to write to us with very, very thoughtful comment. Move on to the next item on our agenda tonight, and that is the consent agenda. So the next item on our agenda tonight is the approval of the June 22nd consent agenda. I will now entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Director Stewart has moved approval of the consent agenda, and it was seconded by Director Carlson. Dr. Staven, would you pull the board?
Yes. Director LaLiberty.
Yes.
Director Sage.
Yes.
Director Carlson.
Yes.
Director Stewart.
Yes.
Director Bleasner.
Yes.
Dr. Staven, would you please summarize the donations that we received?
Yes, donations this month are in the amount of $40,234.84. And that is from PTSA, which is our total amount as well.
Thank you, Dr. Staven. We'll now move to the non-consent agenda. The first item on the non-consent agenda tonight is a discussion and direction to the superintendent related to the Juanita High School mascot. As you heard tonight, the board received a significant amount of comment from our community and our students, our parents, and our staff regarding the mascot. I guess I would like to open it up to comments from board members first, and then we can talk about our action.
And Director Stewart has his hand up.
Thank you.
I think we've made it very clear over the last few months our opinions of this, the problem that presents itself, and have no desire to continue a false narrative or a fake negative narrative on the issue of racism in relationship to a name that has long since passed its due. I would like to recommend, in addition to our operational expectations, following an amendment to it to be added in the operational, the OE10. I'd like to have an OE10.8 inserted, and it would read, the superintendent may not allow any current or future building names, mascots, nicknames, logos, activities, or events to reference or portray bias, derogatory connotations, or prejudice associated with race, creed, color, income, ability, national origin, gender, sexual orientation, or sexual identity. I move we adopt that.
Okay. I'm sorry, Director Stewart, did you move to adopt that policy change?
Well, if perhaps there has to be a discussion first before I move. My apology.
Okay. I don't see any other hands. Does anyone else want to jump in with comments, questions, thoughts?
President,
Director Bleesner? and
former
then
President
Director Carlson.
Bleesner.
So thank you. So first off, just to start with, appreciate all the comments and the conversations that have occurred around this, and in regards to the mascot currently, and where we are at with that. There has been the policy that's currently in place. It is an administrative policy that is there, and so I do think there is importance that we make sure that we do send this to review that policy. Number one, so we ensure that we can address some of the issues mentioned by Director Stewart, that any of these things in regards to a change of mascot, which what this was, also addresses facts of mascot that potentially has the racist, any bias that comes forward from it. Sorry, I'm not wording that very well right now at this point in time. And so I do think that that's a component we need to do so that we ensure that. There also is the next component of how do you decide the new mascot? We do already have a process in deciding of new mascots, and that is forward. We do with our names as well, and that does involve student voice. So whereas I have heard some concerns that our students were involved initially back in 2018, I will say I am a strong believer of student voice, and believe that it is valuable and that it should be incorporated. And in the deciding of a mascot is important, but much the same as we do in the naming, we do actually always have another parameter to ensure that we're taking a holistic view in other bigger issues. And that's what this is. We have a new context. Actually, it's not a new context. We have a more apparent context, I would say. This is not new. And so I think being able to address that most effectively is important. I am very cautious to adopt a new change to our policies at one meeting. I would recommend that any change to a policy has opportunity, some further discussion around to the wording and sort of wordsmithing that over time. We do have opportunity to always bring things back. Our typical policy process is always to have at least a two-touch. So I would recommend that piece in going forward as well. But I do believe that sending this back to our superintendent to look into this, pay attention, and then come back within 2 weeks at our next board meeting in July with a recommendation of how we move forward with ensuring a much more welcoming and inclusive environment in all our schools.
Director Carlson and then Director Sage.
So I like both of those pieces. That is, Siri, I agree that we need to approach this with, that we want to approach it within the framework of the rules. And then for Director Stewart, I think that we need to look at it from the perspective of what does the board know? And for that, I think that we probably need to do both. We send it back to the administrative policy for review, but that we need to take responsibility for it ourselves as the people where the buck stops. So with that, in that context, I wanted to thank everybody who has written us. It's not just the public comments that we read tonight. There have been many people who communicated simply with us as board members through email as well. I have literally never seen more emails that were thoughtfully written individually and not just copy and pasted on any topic in more than a decade on the board. This is something where people are thinking hard, thinking thoughtfully, and trying to advocate for something. And even the people who are concerned that why would we revisit something 2 years after we last revisited something, are still trying to So with that said, I want to make, not on the behalf of the board, but on behalf of myself, statement. Racial justice is not optional. I've always wanted to believe that we live in a post-racist society where the injustices of racism are only experienced as economic echoes of the past. But the events of the last year have made it impossible to hold that belief any longer. I have been part of the problem. When the topic of the rebel mascot came up in 2018, I assumed that it was just a matter of doing some research on the original intent of the school body when they chose it in 1971. I assumed that if there was no malign intent, then our students of color just needed to learn the history and everything would be all right. I was wrong to place the burden of listening and understanding on our students of color. I needed to listen more carefully, and I needed to try harder to understand. It doesn't really matter what the original intent was, and our students of color should not have been asked to learn what the symbol meant back then. Symbolic meanings can drift over decades. What matters is what the symbol means now, and what mascot means for the environment experienced by our students of color. I'm not certain how much the world has changed in the last month. All I can say for certain is that my feelings on this matter have changed dramatically, as I've finally started to grasp the concept of systemic racism. I'm not saying that anyone who originally chose the rebel mascot was a racist, nor that anyone who wants to keep the rebel mascot is racist. I'm simply starting to understand that those of us in the majority need to be sensitive to symbols that create a subtly hostile environment for our minority students. In closing, I want to acknowledge that changing a mascot is easy relative to the work we have before us. This is not the end, this is just the beginning of many years of work we'll need to undertake to find ways to meaningfully improve our system in order to realize the promise of truly equal opportunity for all of our students. Thanks.
Director Sage and Director Stewart, you have your hand up still, so who is you?
Yes, I would like to reiterate all of Director Stewart's comments toward making a change to the OE. But I think we can go even farther than what we've started with what you've started, Director Stewart. I think that if we are looking at specifically OE10 to ensure inclusive, equitable, welcoming, and safe school environment, we can do more than that statement encompassed. And I think we need 2 weeks to make it stronger and to add something that system-wide becomes a change in culture. So I like where you were going with that addition, and I would like to build upon that.
Director Stewart, would you mind if I jumped in before?
Sure, go right ahead.
I'll be very brief. I support the language that Director Stewart brought forward as a policy amendment, and I would like the board to make that policy change to make explicit that the board will not permit any mascots or building names that have a derogatory connotations or prejudice. So I do support that change, that language. I also, within our existing policy framework, this is a decision that is made by staff, or it is an administrative decision, and I support keeping it as an administrative decision. But if we were to adopt this a policy change that made explicit that we will not allow derogatory connotations, my view is that the mascot at Juanita would be in violation of that policy, and that if the mascot were not removed promptly, that the superintendent the staff would be in violation of that policy. So while I would like to maintain that structure, I just want to make plain my views on the mascot. I am embarrassed to not have done something sooner as a board member on this issue. Sorry, Director Stewart, I was longer than I said I would be. But.
All right, I appreciate the comment. I understand the desire to wordsmith, and Eric and I have been doing so for the last few days. I understand the desire to look at other issues. My concern is there is a deep and gaping wound in our community. It needs to be addressed. It needs to be fixed. It needs to be stitched up. We need to have this go forward. One of the reasons, and if we hold it off to the next meeting, then you have to have the administrative point, then take up after that. My desire would be, if we could implement this OE tonight, that gives the administration 2 weeks to start working on it. If we knock it down the road, again, then everyone feels that, okay, they're just pushing it off. I'd like to make something very clear. I grew up, as you can tell from my accent, not around Washington. I grew up in a very racist, segregated state. I went to segregated schools for half my schooling. It was not comfortable. It was an ugly scene. I watched some things that I didn't like, and it propelled me into what I do for a living, and that's working with the media, working with public opinion, because I didn't like the town that I grew up in. It was an ugly little situation. That said, when I moved up here 14 years ago, I was shocked to see the name Rebel on one of the schools. First of all, I thought geographically I made a U-turn and I was back in Oklahoma. But second of all, it just, with all the other symbols disappearing around the country, and for it to be maintained in the state of Washington, one of the most progressive states in the country, I thought was a mistake. And we were told in the past that this is up to the students, it's administrative, board can't touch it. But as Eric and I looked through there, we realized if we put the operational expectation in there, then that gives the administration the freedom to work however they feel they need to do to implement this expectation. That's why I'd like to see it implemented tonight. It's not a rule, fast and hard rule that we have to wait. It is tradition. And sometimes traditions have to be broken, just like mascots do. So I would recommend that we have the vote tonight and allow our administration 2 more weeks to work on it in their respect, because it's not going to be easy for them. They've got a lot of work to do, and I don't want to delay it.
I see hands from Director Belizner and Director Sage. So we'll start with Director Belizner and then Director Sage.
Director Sage. Thank you. I was going to let Director Sage go.
Okay, we'll do that then. Director Sage and Director Belizner.
I didn't actually know my hand was still up, but I'm happy to weigh in. I have 3 students who are Juanita High School alumni, all graduated. Sorry, I didn't know my camera was off.
Somebody's
And I have,
around there.
and I currently have a junior at Juanita High School. And I agree that in 2018, as a community, no, I'll just take it myself. As an individual, I did not understand the pain and the feelings around the mascot, and I should have sought out student voice on my own, because I know so many of the kids, to get their input and to try and understand that to them it was obviously not an American Revolution icon. To them, 49 years after the school has been named, it appears that it's a very different association with the term rebel. And going forward, I think that there's things that we can write into policy that create system-wide change on issues of systemic racism, on issues of inclusivity, and issues of equity. And I would like to see us develop an equity policy so that it can permeate the system and create effective change.
Thank you, Director Sage. Director Belizner.
Thank you. So I do think currently, as our policy is written with the safe and welcoming inclusion, it is still very a clear concept. No, clear is probably not the right word. That the administration can still fit this within that, and we don't limit any time frame. I'd like to echo what Cassandra Sage has said in regards to an equity policy. We had discussed this, and we had started on this about 2 years ago, and it started down that path. And I see that being a broader discussion and something we can really build through and address some of the broader issues and be able to really attack these. The rebel mascot is one component, and it is an action that can be taken, and it's very clear. The key thing is that is step one of a much bigger, broader issues to be able to work with and to build on. And I think we need to be thinking about the full policy, and that means incorporating in conversations with our student groups, with our students of color, our teachers of color, our community, our stakeholders, to talk about what is that and be able to process that through. So I want to be able to use that, all those pieces to bring everybody in as we go forward with this. So I'm in agreement for an entire equity policy, as we have talked about and started forward. And I would still believe that even under the current structure we have, there is no reason that a decision can't be determined in the next 2 weeks of which to go forward.
Director Carlson, I don't know if you have the ability to raise your hand on the software on your computer.
Oh, I've weighed in, and I can raise my hand if I want to. My only reluctance. I appreciate the importance of this, and I am hesitant to substitute urgency for import. That's only because if we're going to change policy, I want to change policy within the structures that we've set up for changing policy. I don't want to just ignore policy when I don't want to use it. And so towards that end, even though I think I'm in favor of the proposed amendment, I think I'd like to put it into the consent agenda for 2 weeks from now so that we can officially do this the way we usually do. But simultaneously, that doesn't mean we can't telegraph to the administration where we're going with it, that this is a change that we're making. We just need to make sure that we get the language carefully correct. Anyway, that's all the more I have to add on the topic.
Okay, thank you, Director Carlson. Director Sage, your hand went down and then back. Your virtual hand went down and then back up. Did you have something else to add? And then
I'm sorry, I'm down right now. I don't know what it's doing, but I like to talk a lot, but I need to stop at some point.
Okay, Dr. Stavum, your hand went up, and then Director Stewart, did you have something else to add? Your hand is up.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I just wanted to offer a point of clarification for our public who may be watching tonight, in that our school district has a governance structure that actually has 2 sets of policies. And so as we're talking about policies and policy work related to this issue, there are administrative policies which govern the working of the school district, and operational pieces, instructional pieces. Those are available on the website if people want to look at those. The other part of the policy structure in our school district is board policy, which guides the outcomes, the compliance, and the results. And so as we talk about these things, I think we're all very familiar with this. The board sets policies that then enable the operational side for staff to do the work that carries out what the board desires in their board policies. So it's a multi-layered conversation that we're having right now about board policy potential changes that then encompass the work that staff does, which may also require a change in administrative policy. So I just wanted to put that out there as a point of clarification, because when we talk about policies, often we're more used to kind of what that means than maybe our general public is.
Thank you, Dr. Stavum. Director Stewart.
Yes.
Director Stewart, did you have your hand? Your virtual hand is raised.
Yes, I didn't know. All of a sudden you froze there. I wasn't sure what where you were going. I realize that there's a lot of additional issues that need to be addressed in this area. And I don't remember who first said it, but the first step is always the hardest, especially when you're trying to right or wrong, to try and do justice by people who have never had the justice given to them that they deserve. This is a time to start. We can add on to it, we can build on it, we can tweak it all that we want to, but we need to have a start to show our community that we're serious about this. That this isn't something to diddle around with because of tradition. We have no policy that states we can't vote the same night at all. We checked on that, and it's apparent that all we have is tradition. Well, this is a night for non-tradition. And I would extremely suggest that we look to the feelings and the passions of our community as opposed to a tradition of how we structure our meetings and how we structure the adoption of policy. There is no rule in place. There is no whack in place. There is no edict from either WASDA or, for that matter, from the State Board of Education. It's pure and simple wanna. And I think it's time for us to wanna. And I'd like to see us adopt this as it is, and we can improve it. We can add to it to make sure we encompass others. I think this is a fairly inclusive resolution or addition to our policy. Thank you.
Director Bleasner? Director Bleasner, hands raised. I can't hear. I'm not sure if you're on mute or.
Sorry, I was muted. If there is we do not currently have a motion on the floor, so I am wondering if there's need to have a motion on the floor so that there can be a decision as to whether or not.
Yeah, yes, if we're going to be making a decision, there certainly needs to be a motion. I think we're still hearing discussion from board members generally on policy, procedure, and the mascot. I don't know that we necessarily need a motion at this moment. But yes, if we were to make a decision, if we're going to be amending policy, it needs to be by motion.
Thank you.
Director Sage?
Director Stewart, could you speak the lines that you had wanted to add as a 10.8 you said? Could you tell me exactly what you said?
Okay, sure. I'm sorry. Didn't have a chance to share it with everyone. That's the trouble of being remote. The superintendent may not, and then it goes into 10.8, may not allow any current or future building names, mascots, nicknames, logos, activities, or events to reference or portray bias, derogatory connotations, or prejudice associated with race, creed, color, income, ability, national origin, gender, sexual orientation, or sexual identity.
I'm wondering if under 10.2, ensuring an inclusive, equitable, welcoming, and safe school environment, comma, free of the things that you just mentioned, addresses those same points, and then we move forward with an equity policy discussion.
If that's the case, then we should have acted 2 years ago, because then we had the permission, and the administration should have realized at that time that we had permission to do so, or they had permission to do so. So I'm making it explicit, so no one has any questions, no doubt about it, we need to change.
I, for one, agree that we need a change. I can't speak for the rest, but I have a feeling all of us would like to see a change.
Director Bleasner, and then if I can chime in.
No, Director Lilliver, go ahead.
No, you're fine.
Nope.
I'd like to hear from you.
Actually, I was trying to figure out how to put my hand down. So what I will say, I mean, the conversation appreciated greatly, and the way in which to work through the policy and ensure that's there. We actually adopted the we knew the administrative policy 2 years ago in 2018. We made a mistake. I'll own up. You know, it was not a definitive action on our part to ensure that this couldn't happen. And so it did. And so now I think there actually is a bigger piece of what is that process to ensure that that doesn't happen going forward on the administrative side. So actually on the operational. So that piece is vitally important. And ensuring that we have a policy in which to do so. And I would second Director Sage in the sense that the policy of welcoming and inclusion is there, and we did not use it to the level we likely should have, and that was our mistake to not do so. So that is the component that I would say.
Thank you, Director Blaisner. So I'm going to try to summarize what I've heard from the board so far. I think, and if I have this wrong, I'd like someone to tell me that. I'm hearing from the board, I think almost clear consensus that we want this staff superintendent to review the mascot and come back to us with a recommendation promptly. I think I'm hearing from most that we'd like that at our July board meeting. I have expressed, and I've heard from others, the desire to look at amending our policy to make explicit that we will not permit derogatory school buildings, mascot names, nicknames. I think where there's disagreement in the board is whether to adopt the specific policy language that Director Stewart and I have proposed tonight, or at all, or whether to do it as more of a comprehensive look at our policies. But I think I have heard pretty clearly tonight is a lot of disappointment, honestly, in what our mascots are currently, and a strong desire for staff to come back soon. Director Carlson, I know you were offline for just a moment. There are technical difficulties. And I see your hand is up now.
Yeah. Well, no, I wanted to say thank you. And yes, I don't want to make it sound like I don't want to add explicit language. I believe we can move forward with asking the administration to start something under the existing OE, and we can carefully and deliberately add language that makes it explicit for future decisions as well in parallel. It's not either or, it's both and.
Okay. Director Stewart, I want to hear your thoughts, and also you had earlier there was a question of whether you were making a motion at the time, and I just want clarity on that.
Well, I believe we need to act now. I've made that really clear. I understand the desire to try and find another way to do it. We haven't found that way in 2 years. We haven't found it in the months since we've been hearing comments from students, faculty, you name it. Everyone in the community has had a chance, and many of them have expressed it. For us to ignore it because the procedures need to be followed, or we might not have an inclusive enough list, bothers me. I would like to move that we adopt 10.8 tonight.
Are you making a motion?
I did. I just said I would like to move that we adopt 10.8 tonight. That would give the administration a good time to start. They'd know where the board stood. It wouldn't be as hazy, perhaps, as 10.2. While 10.2 is a good statement overall, it doesn't specifically address this question. And if it wasn't clear enough 2 years ago to us, who knows when it's ever going to be clear enough to us. Therefore, I really believe that we need to act tonight to give the administration all the time they need, because it's not going to be an easy lift. They're going to have to talk to students, teachers, you name it, whatever they have to do to get this ball rolling. And I want to give them all the tools and all the time they need.
Okay, thank you, Director Stewart. So there's a motion on the floor to adopt an amendment to operational expectation policy 10 to add a 10.8, which was that was the language that Director Stewart read earlier. Is there a second?
I'm going to come back to my concern over changing our rules when our rules don't suit us. The normal way to change a policy is to have a first reading followed by adoption in the next board meeting. So I can't second adopting a policy change in the same meeting that we first read it. That does not mean, Mark, that I believe that we are not providing direction to the administration nor taking action. I am simply saying that you don't change all of the rules when you perceive yourself as needing to move faster than usual, because that breaks precedent for the future. I think we need to stick with how we change our rules in order to stay deliberative rather than acting by fiat. And again, that does not mean that this is not providing direction to the superintendent. If we consider tonight a first reading, and in 2 weeks it's going to be adopted.
Okay, so I just want to reiterate, we have a motion pending. I did not hear a second. So the motion, I suppose, I don't know if it's stricken or fails, but it is not going forward. I'm just going to offer my 2 cents again. I would like to see this policy language adopted. If it's not adopted until our next meeting after the board has had a chance to review it, fine. I just want to be, my personal opinion is I want to be clear that I want staff to review the mascot and make a recommendation also at our next board meeting.
And that would be under the existing OE2.
Correct.
8.2. So,
correct.
Yeah.
So may I interject?
Please.
Or Dr. Holman, as the superintendent who will be standing here at the July meeting, just to clarify, what I believe I'm hearing is that the board is requesting staff to take action, and I'm also hearing potentially that you would also like a first draft of a modified OE for that section to potentially be brought to the board for consideration. So it would be anything that would require a board action that the superintendent and board president would bring forth at the next meeting. Is that correct?
I think that's right. That's what I'm hearing.
Well, so I think that the first draft has been brought to us. It's just that we need to. The first reading has happened tonight, but it's not been adopted. That it would simply be adopted in 2 weeks, pending any edits that are made.
But it would be the revised version of that policy that would be brought back through the agenda.
Yes.
Correct. Okay. I just want to make sure that we're all thinking the same thing.
Okay. Geez, a lot of hands went up at once. Director Sage.
So, just to make sure that I understand, we can tonight recommend a policy addition, and then president and superintendent can revise it for the next reading if we consider this the first reading.
The board can consider revised board policy as well as any administrative policy that the superintendent may also bring forth.
I think that's right. What I'm hearing tonight is, I took down what Mark read aloud, and what I'm hearing tonight is that would be brought forward at our next meeting for adoption or discussion. And then in addition to that, the direction I'm hearing from the board is for staff to review and provide a recommendation on the administrative side to deal with the mascot.
Yeah.
Okay, so just to make sure I completely understand,
Yeah.
this is us tonight saying, go forward with this, and we would be able to vote in 2 weeks on it? Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
I
and
think that's pretty clear.
yeah. And my clarification is that those would be coming back to an agenda so that you would have those revised versions to review So it would include the proposed revision tonight to board policy that would then be part of the agenda at your next meeting, as well as any other changes proposed by staff per the direction of the board tonight to review anything else that would need to be brought to that agenda for action.
That's right. Dr. Holman, your hand went up a little bit ago. I apologize for not getting to you till now.
That's okay. I also like to keep the workflow, keeping everyone working in their space. And so really what the board has done tonight is expressed a value and essentially talked about what is the definition of OE10 and potentially maybe not interpreting it previously in this light. And so with this new interpretation really of OE10 and that you're going to potentially add some language within the policy, I think you're asking me to then take a look at the administrative side to make sure that our practices are in alignment with the values that the board is expressing tonight.
I guess also a follow-up question, is it clear to staff tonight what the board's values are and what our interpretation is of policy?
Well, based on what Director Stewart proposed as policy language, I got the sense that in general, the board is in agreement with that being if we just leave it at a value level right now, as that is a value. And there were comments made that that could already be part of OE10 even without a modification right now. And so the board is already indicating what indicators they would look for as we monitor OE10 in the future.
Okay, thank you. Directors, let's see here. Director Carlson, you have a hand up?
Yes, I do. Yes, Dr. Holman, I think you caught most of what we're after. You've expressed it in the dry language of policy governance. For our audience, I think we might express it as the board is concerned with the rebel mascot creating a hostile environment and has asked you to bring back to us what our options are. Or rather, if we choose to interpret 10.2 as this would not be an appropriate mascot any longer, bring to us the recommendation on what's the process for changing it.
Correct.
Thanks.
And that would be at our next board meeting as well, which is set for July, early July, second Monday in July, I think. Sorry, Dr. Savim, you opened your mouth. You're about to say something.
Well, I don't know what dates you've sent, but I was just going to note that the board has set meetings in July, that you typically do not have meetings in July, but that you have scheduled, is it 1 or 2 meetings?
Yeah.
So we tentatively have July 13th and 27th that we're going to schedule board meetings. So I believe we're talking about the July 13 meeting.
Director Stewart, your hand is still raised. Do you have something you want to add?
Yeah, I understand the board's desire to follow protocol set by tradition. I hear you. If that's the case, so be it. I would like to make sure that, to be quite frank, I would like to make sure this is the issue that we debate, 10.8, and not just allow 10.2 to be there as a touchstone. I'd like to make it explicit because 20 years down the road, no one's going to remember what in the world happened. And when they have another situation like that, it's not going to be explicit enough. They're going to have the same problem that we had. They're going to have a difficulty interpreting that 10 point as good as it is. It still does not explicitly spell out what we need to. And I think by doing so, we make a mark. We make our voice heard to our entire community, to those students of color, to the parents of color, to the administration and teaching staff of color. So that is my preference, is that we discuss 10.8 as an addition next week. In fact, I'll even propose it as a motion. I propose that we I move that we discuss 10.8 as an addition to OE 10 to be explicit to our intent and explicit to our desire to enter our community and to listen to our community.
There's a motion from Director Stewart to bring forward the proposed change to the policy to add the language he proposed tonight at our next meeting for discussion and adoption. Do I have that right, Director Stewart?
Yes.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, any further discussion?
I believe I don't know if you can have a motion to actually adopt. I think you can have a motion for board action on that, which are two different, because to adopt means you're affirming it today in your motion versus saying you'll take action next week.
I'm sorry, but perhaps I was inarticulate. That is what I understood Director Stewart's motion to be.
Yes. It's my intent.
Director Carlson, who seconded
It's
it,
my
that what you
intent.
understood it to be?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay.
Basically,
So-
putting on the agenda, not taking action.
If I am understanding the motion as put forward is how it's been said tonight is how we are to adopt it at our next meeting?
No, I don't think that's
To be discussed for adoption.
yeah.
So you're asking for an agenda item?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, an agenda item does not need a motion, it can just go on as an agenda item, but I would argue that the agenda item should have a possibility of discussion over this time frame of what is the best approach and what is the right wording and angle, that it would not necessarily come back exactly as is right now.
Okay, thank you.
I'd be shocked if it did.
Yeah. So your Director
So I would like to
Sage,
amend the motion to be that we look at a revised policy of 10.10
OE10.
OE10 that incorporates in the additional, and
Addition.
now I've lost my, the addition, there we go, thank you.
I'm just wondering,
before discussion, there's a motion to amend from Director Bleasner on the floor. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
So here's the challenge. Generally, motions are things where we're going to take a vote, and I think we're just all expressing an interest in putting this on the agenda to take votes in 2 weeks.
Yes.
So that doesn't require a motion.
No, but
No, it's all right. I mean, Robert's rules of orders suck sometimes.
yeah, here we are. Okay. Any discussion on Director Bleasner's amendment? Okay, I'll offer my 2 cents. I'm in favor of Director Bleasner's. I think it makes sense. We bring this forward. We have it. This is going to be. We're talking about whether this ends up on the agenda next week. I actually think that as president, I may have authority to put it on the agenda, even if you all disagree, and I'm going to do that no matter what the vote of this is. So it's going to be on the agenda for next week, and we'll have discussion of OE10, including amending it and adding the language that Director Stewart proposed. So all that said, we want to vote on Director Bleasner's amendment and then Dr. Bleasner's amendment.
I don't think we need to vote on it. It's just an agenda item.
Oh, come on, here we are. We're all the way down
I'm
the road.
just going to vote so I can be heard.
Okay. All right, we're going to vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay. Do we need to vote on, I've lost track. I've lost the plot here. Do we need to vote? We now have amended the motion. I think we need to now vote on the motion itself.
That is true.
So,
Or it can
okay,
be
so
withdrawn.
the motion now as amended is that the board will bring operational expectation 10, which is just for those at home, that is our policy for the educational environment, and the board will review that policy, including potentially adding the language proposed by Director Stewart tonight. So that is the motion as amended by Director Bleasner. I guess we'll vote now. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, so the motion passes. So, okay, I think we can safely wrap this up now. So at this time, the board is requesting that the superintendent analyze the Juanita High School mascot and bring an update and recommendation for any required action to the board at our next board meeting on July 13th. In addition, the board will be reviewing and potentially amending our own policies on the educational environment, potentially including Director Stewart's additional language which makes explicit the board's interpretation of our policy regarding derogatory or offensive mascots. Okay.
And then I would
Well,
just.
that was it. Yes, sorry, Dr. Saban.
Just for clarity, as we move on to the next agenda item, if everyone puts their hands down for a fresh move into the next agenda item, just as a point of business.
There's the problem with virtual meetings. You don't really have to see people just.
I didn't want to put any down.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you to everyone on the board. That was a very robust and I think fruitful discussion. And I think we made very clear to staff how the board views the current state of affairs and what we'd like to see happen. Okay, the next item on our agenda, on the non-consent agenda, is an update to the fall planning for reopening schools. Dr. Statham?
Yep, this is an ongoing work in our district, as you're all very well aware. There's still a lot going on at a regional, state level, as school districts everywhere, and it's certainly not even just the state of Washington, are really trying to dissect the guidance that's been put out, trying to operationalize that, trying to, all of us kind of look into a crystal ball, not knowing where our county will be with reopening. And so there's a lot happening to try to anticipate a number of scenarios that may be what we are working with when it comes to reopening. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Holman and Mike Van Orden to just give you an update. It will be probably more brief tonight just because there isn't a lot of new information and just a lot of active planning, but they can give you an update on where we are at this point.
Thank you, Dr. Statham. We are actively working to put plans together for restarting school next year. And with that comes the guidance. Dr. Statham talked about kind of all of the different sets of information we are having to digest and respond to with the OSPI guidance, the governor's orders around phasing by county, Department of Health at the state level and the county level. Those are all sets of information and really requirements that we have to be responsive to as we are developing our plans. And based on the current set of information we have, it started to narrow down our options that we have for reopening school next year. And so in a letter to the community and staff on Friday, I gave some indications as to the things that we're thinking about, such as looking to be able to provide services for our youngest students on site to the greatest degree possible, knowing that students will need to be on campus at least part of our weeks. Those are the things that we are working actively towards because we know our parents and families, they really need a decision point as soon as possible so that they can actually make plans for their students should they not be in school full time. And so Mike has an update right now looking at some of the models that we're actually evaluating right now as we determine and make decisions so that we can communicate with our families. And so with that, I'll hand it over to Mike so he can share with you the work that we're currently doing right now and hoping to make a decision around the model here within the next little while.
Thanks. As Dr. Holman mentioned, we're focusing our update tonight on a very specific part of our planning. At the same time, I can't understate the complexity of the work that's happening. we're basically reinventing the way we deliver schooling, all the way from how we deliver day-to-day instruction to the way we get kids to school, to the way kids work in schools. And so just know that underneath the update we share tonight, there's a tremendous amount of work going on, and I don't want it to sound like, well, just because we're talking about the scenarios, there aren't countless other things happening. We'll touch on those briefly just to give you a flavor of that, but again, I just don't want to lose that. So as Dr. Holman mentioned, we are working very actively and planning for our return to school. And as you may recall, I think at our last meeting we shared that we have a return to school task force that we charged with some very high level planning with the stated goals of making sure that kids can come back to school safely in a way that protects their health, that we're focused on the social and emotional supports kids need, particularly in this pandemic, making sure that we're thinking about inclusive education, and that we are improving on what we offered this year. We want to make sure we acknowledge that we transition very quickly and we need to do better, and we need to make sure that we're taking care of our families. We have a number of guiding principles that reflect those kind of key areas that all our groups are working on. And I want to highlight in particular, in light of the conversation we were having tonight, that we need to be very attentive to racial inequities that have always existed in our system, and inequities related to students with disabilities, and inequities related to students who speak English as a second language, and related to socioeconomics. And those need to be intentionally planned for, because they've always existed and they've been made worse by the pandemic. So as I mentioned, we've had 3 work groups, and I'm going to focus very specifically on the scenario planning tonight. So the scenario planning work group was charged with looking at different models, what we call hybrid models, that we are thinking about how do students return to school. They were charged also with looking at things that could be beneficial from each of those options, as well as challenges or constraints, and tasked with talking about mitigating factors. How can we address some of the challenges we can see so we can get to the benefit? They looked at a number of different ways students could return to school. And so that group was really charged with kind of looking at the big picture, identifying those areas that I mentioned, and then passing that information on to a next stage. As Dr. Holman was mentioning as well, we've had some recent guidance that was delivered by the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction that informed that work. And there are a couple of things that are worth highlighting here. One is, and I think many folks have heard, there's a high interest on the part of our state, our communities, to have students back in person. We recognize that's the best way for most of our students to learn. And we also have to make sure we're following Department of Health guidelines. So those two have to live together. And that's where we find that we need to work very carefully to find just that right balance. In addition, there's an expectation that our students are getting the full range of time and days next year. We're working to define exactly how those will be counted. We also have to be ready very quickly to move to a full remote setting. We're not going to have 2 weeks to plan next year. If we do need to move, we are expected to move very, very rapidly. And finally, we'll be expected to provide and think about daily attendance. In addition, I was mentioning briefly before, we need to be thinking about how do we keep kids safe and healthy. Right now, that guidance is coming across as social distancing, and there's kind of a standard that's being expressed that social distancing is looking at 6 foot in classrooms. And so really that is starting to drive, as Dr. Holman was mentioning, the scenarios that we can look at for students to return to school. Because if you have to keep students apart, then we have to be thinking about the capacity of a building and a classroom to hold students that are spread that far apart. And that starts to have a pretty significant impact on what options are available. For example, in a classroom, if you're going to keep kids 6 feet apart, you're looking at probably a maximum of anywhere from 16 to 20 smaller students, and maybe even around 15 as you get to larger students, where if you have any more students than that in a classroom, you just can't fit everybody in and keep them 6 feet apart. And so that's a major factor. But also we know we have very busy hallways, busy lunchrooms, and schools, as we've worked on for years, are full. They're in many cases at capacity. So that's going to drive the scenarios that we can think about. There are a number of other things that we'll be thinking about over the course of the summer and into next year, as I was mentioning, that will need to happen as well. So that's guidance that we've been getting from the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction. So based on that guidance, based on the work of our scenarios planning group, there are three ways of thinking about schools, three ways of thinking about returning, or what we're calling models that are the most viable. One is in person. That's what we want to make sure we do. That will come with, even when we do get back to in-person, changes in practice. Things like safety protocols, cleaning protocols, health protocols that will need to be in place. And for us to go there, we're going to need approval from the governor, Department of Health, and right now our re-entry really isn't tied explicitly. I'm talking about schools when I say are across the state, isn't tied explicitly to the return phases that are being outlined by the governor. And so we're going to be expecting to get some direction on when we can go back full time. It's not going to be a decision, I believe, that individual districts are going to be allowed to make. The other way that we're anticipating that will be most likely our fall scenario will be what's called a hybrid model, where some students are in school and some are out. And this is where Dr. Holman was saying we are going to be really drilling down into what are the different scenarios that are most likely to meet the various needs of our students and staff. But essentially, as he was mentioning, what we're looking at as guiding points will be that we need to make sure that we can have students back who are struggling right now, particularly our younger students. If you think about a kindergarten student at home or a first grade student at home, we're thinking about, we have the capacity potentially to have all of our students in those younger grades back because one, they're typically in lower class sizes. Two, they would benefit most from being back in school. And three, we think we may be able to find the capacity in our buildings to make that work with social distancing. So we're looking at where's that threshold where we can have enough staff, enough space, have few enough students in a building that we can actually have some of our students actually back for a significant portion, if not all of the week. We also, though, for any student want to make sure that they have the ability to come back and have some in-person learning unless we're being told they have to be completely remote. And so we're looking again at what does that look like? And this is where the details get very particular in what we're working on this week is there are lots of different ways to do that. Essentially, though, all of them boil down to splitting your population in half and then having one group that's on one schedule and another group that's on another schedule. And essentially, you could stagger them. So one group comes one day, the other group comes the next day. Similarly, you might have students coming for 2 days in a row, and then another group comes for the next 2 days, and then you have a day where possibly they alternate. So we're in the process right now of identifying what configuration will actually work the best, because there are lots of factors to consider. For example, if half the students are in a class and half are at home, how does a teacher make sure they're both getting a really high quality experience on that same day? And so there's lots of different ways that you can kind of figure out how that might be. In addition, if they're all home, how do you make sure that we continue to provide really high quality instruction? We also need to make sure that whatever plan we come up with allows us to pivot quickly into a remote option or an in-person option, or even a phased option where students are coming back to school. As with the full in-time, we need to make sure that we can have the capacity for safety protocols, cleaning protocols. And so again, as we're thinking about having groups that are coming to school on a schedule, we want to make sure there's time to clean schools as well, is make sure that we are keeping the schools safe while they're there. Finally, we know that we will have some of our students that will need to be home fully remote. They will have health or safety issues. We also have staff members who are in that same boat, and we will have students that maybe need to be isolated for 2 weeks. And so we need to make sure we have a robust remote option. So those are the three models. And then within the models, again, there's quite a bit of work that needs to be done to define the details, particularly for that hybrid model. And so right now we're working with our Lake Washington Education Association members, principals, as well as other administrators centrally to get very clear on what is that hybrid going to look like, with the goal of having some additional information by the end of the week. And then going to our community. And I'll share more information about that timeline in a moment. I want to be sharing that there's lots of detail work to do before we get to that next level of detail, which I know folks are really anticipating getting. The other thing I didn't mention briefly is, in addition to our youngest students, we're looking at how we might be able to support students who are currently in programs by being able to actually come back in person, again, for a certain number of days per week. And again, those might be in classes. They also might be days where students come and get additional services and supports in addition to participating in general education, remote or in-person instruction. So, as I mentioned,
Mike, Director Carlson had his hand raised. Before you move on, I wanted to let him ask.
Sorry, thanks. So, Mike, I just wanted to clarify, you said that our restart is not necessarily tied explicitly to what phase we're in?
There hasn't been a specific, which would be ideal, right? We would say phase 4, you can come back, and I think you saw in the Seattle Times this weekend, they're saying, phase 4, we're going to come back.
Yeah.
I think I just think the governor will say, yes, that's actually what you can do. So yes, I think we should anticipate that, but ultimately there will be a decision made that we're going to have to follow, and that'll be based on Department of Health governor. It might be phase 3.5, it might be phase 3, but I think, but right now there's just hasn't been an explicit connection drawn between return to school and governor's orders.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Superintendent Reichdahl actually explicitly said that currently it's not tied because they wanted to give statewide guidance around returning to school, and knowing that everyone's going to be in different phases and everyone has different conditions that they're dealing with given their district variables, that they weren't tying it. What we know is that physical distancing is required through all 4 phases. And so just given that alone, unless they make it explicit that physical distancing is not a required part of phase 4 return to school, then we believe this is our return to school plan until they say otherwise.
Thanks.
Again, so much more detail to come. And we want to acknowledge, we know people are wanting to know what days will my kids be in school so that they can plan the schedule. And we'll share a timeline for that. And there's just so much work that needs to be done to get it right. And we know that things could change between now and August. And so we want to make sure we have the best plan to share with folks and do that in a timely manner as well. I did want to also just very briefly share that, as I mentioned, there's quite a bit more work happening. And the reason we're sharing the scenario planning tonight is that, one, we know that people are really interested and expecting more information on this. At the same time, it's also a dependency that to get to move on many of these other things, we have to have that plan developed so that we can start working on things like what does the instructional day look like? How are we going to be transporting kids to school? Communicating to families what their schedules are. So it's in our interest to get that decision made sooner than later, and that will allow us to get to a lot of the other decisions that have to be made as part of our planning efforts. And so what I'm sharing with you right now is just at a very high level how we're organizing and coordinating that planning. We're building it around this organizational structure of our district. As you know, we have a number of divisions. And then in each of those divisions, there are folks who have expertise and responsibility for areas that will need to be planned for our return to school. For example, transportation. We have a whole transportation department that is working on thinking about different scenarios for if we have to bring half of our students to school on one day and half on another. And if half of those students live in one part of the district, routes will have to be planned. And so knowing what our scenario will be will allow our transportation department to move even further ahead. Similarly, everything from lunchroom procedures to instructional routines to how we're providing supports really are dependent on that scenario being at least developed and communicated so that a lot of work can happen. And at the same time, there's work happening in each of these planning areas as well. And I want to just quickly show you how we're structuring that. So we have for each of those areas a number of different smaller planning groups that are looking at state, local, national guidance to plan for, again, how do you transport students to school? How do you deliver instruction? What counts as a full day? How can we assign credit? I mean, as you can imagine, there are just countless decisions to be made. Each of those groups will be working in parallel. And we're going to have a project manager that's overseeing them all because, as you can imagine, not only are there lots of individual decisions to be made, but those decisions are all in many ways very connected to each other. And so we need someone that will help us to kind of manage the dependencies, make sure all the decisions are being made in a timely manner. And so our project manager is going to be working with us to make sure not only are we coordinating, but also making sure that we're making decisions in a timely way and that we have key deliverables that we can point to. We will also be able to use that to provide community updates and updates to you. In addition, we have a district steering committee that consists of leaders for each of those groups that will be meeting weekly to coordinate efforts, share work that's happening so that when we do have interdependencies, we can work through them. And then as a cabinet team, we'll be meeting immediately following those steering committees meetings so that we can make timely decisions and discuss communication that will go out each week. Finally, we will be having processes for community input, including work that will start next week. And in addition, we're also looking at how do we use the community input we've already gathered to inform the work of the committees. And then finally, as I mentioned, we will be sharing information weekly with our internal groups as well as our external groups. So just in terms of the complexity of this and what I was talking about at the beginning, just for something like personal protective equipment, which there's a lot of discussion, as you know, happening in our community right now. Right now, the current guidance is that students and staff will wear face masks on returning to school. Well, there are all sorts of things to consider for that, from who's ordering them, how do you make sure you have a steady supply, what do you do when a kid doesn't bring one, what do you do when a kid refuses? Just that one thing is a complex series of decisions that need to be made and relate to other things like classroom instruction. How do you make sure that your kids are all interacting in a positive way? So again, underneath those big group areas are project plans that are going into a very specific level of detail that our project coordinator is working with us on. So do you see there's a hand before I just talk about the timeline? I wonder, do you want me to stop and just answer questions?
Director
Director
Stewart.
Stewart, how about, I think we just have one hand up. Director Stewart, do you want to ask a question?
Still having technical difficulties. I have technical difficulties, and I missed a good point of your slides. Would you mind sharing them with us via email?
Yeah.
I'm sorry to have had that, but I've nearly shot the screen.
Yeah, I'll do that right after I'm done with the presentation.
Thanks, Mike. No, at your leisure, at your convenience.
Okay. So the last part is, again, a high-level timeline, much greater detail under this, but just, again, that we're providing an update tonight. So as you know, we have our Return to School Task Force I mentioned that was convened in May. In June, our task force groups, in particular our scenarios group, was reviewing those scenarios. We also have been working since May on instructional planning at the elementary.
And I'm not ignoring you. I've tried.
Mark, your microphone's on.
At the elementary.
Mark had a child come in the room there.
Yeah. At the elementary and secondary levels. And as I mentioned, we've identified some viable hybrid scenarios that we're vetting this week with the goal of by the end of the week having a recommended scenario that we can share that's much more specific than what I shared tonight. Then in early July, which would be next week, we want to start talking about how we're gathering feedback from our community on those different models. And that includes getting information about what types of support families would need if we were in any of them, as well as identifying families that are thinking they may be fully remote, so we can plan for that as well. Our planning teams in all those areas I mentioned will continue to work throughout the summer. And as I mentioned, Dr. Holman is committed to weekly updates to our community. And when I say community, I mean teachers, staff, families, community members. Then early August, at the latest, we want to be able to communicate the model that we've selected as well as schedules that fit within those. For example, are you going to have which students are actually coming to school on which days, and how just figuring out how to divide that up in a way that gets you the right numbers is going to take a lot of planning. What the instructional day will look like, so families can begin planning. And again, that's our goal of early August. We might have to shift a little bit one way or the other, just depending on planning efforts and new information that we're getting. We're going to be doing some pretty intentional staff training. We're hearing this from all of our groups that we need to make sure our staff are well equipped to deliver instruction and supports for academic, social, emotional, and behavior. We'll continue weekly updates. And then the goal of September, we're ready to go to re-enter schools following Department of Health guidelines, governor's guidelines, and OSPI guidelines. So again, very high level overview of the timeline, much more detail under this, and some of that detail we'll be communicating in our weekly updates. And that is officially the end of our presentation.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Any other questions from board members before we move to our next agenda item?
Eric, I'm just going to take point of privilege tonight, and
Yes.
I think, this is something like we've never seen before during any of our careers and during our lifetime, really. And I was glad Mike put up the one chart that shows the decision-making just for the one piece. I can't overemphasize how complex this is, and we know it's super frustrating for our community patrons because they're wanting to make decisions. What we want them to know is we want them to stay with us in our schools. We want to have children back as safely as possible and as soon as possible, and we want our families to stay connected with our schools. And I also want to commend all of our teams. They have dug in, and this is not those typical meetings where you can kind of wrestle a problem around and come to a conclusion and make a decision. This is dependent upon so many areas, and they have hung in there amazingly well and are leading this work and doing such a great job. And this is going to continue all summer long, which also isn't typical in the same way. We always have intensity of planning just around regular pieces of school and planning for next year. This puts it at a whole new level, and they are just doing a magnificent job. So I just want to thank them and just let people know that this is not typical work, and they are doing an outstanding job.
Thank you. Director Bleasner, your hand is raised.
It is. I just want to say, sorry, I'll put it down. I just want to say thank you for, again, be echoing what Dr. Stavum has just said, actually, the amount of work that's going into this. It reminds me a little bit of reconfiguration and the work that went into that over 2 years. And you're doing that in a much shorter time frame in doing so. I would also just be, if I understood the presentation correctly, it does sound as if there will be a full online option that will be available, that is the goal.
Yes, that's correct. And here's the thing. On the surface, it just sounds so obvious, right? So we have kids that will be home. We have staff members that are in high risk groups that should be home. And it just seems like the solution just is presenting itself. But think about this too. We have kids at all grade levels that will be at home in different numbers. We have staff members who are certificated to teach in different areas who will be clustered in different areas. And so lining those up perfectly is not perfect. And so figuring out how to do that in a way that allows us to make sure every kid who's home gets a really great experience with a teacher who's qualified to teach them is much more than just saying match them up, because you have to match up grade level, content, and expertise. And so, as Dr. Stavum was mentioning, even that, which sounds so perfect, has a lot of work that has to be done to do it well. But yes, to answer your question, there should be a fully remote option for families.
Oh, great, thank you. The other piece is, and I know that I had the opportunity to actually meet with surrounding board members of sort of how this is all going and some of the piece from the policy level. I'm assuming that you are all doing the same in meeting with our counterparts surrounding. As we know, the more aligned we are and working together as districts and partnering or sharing resources and ideas, the better off we will be going forward.
Yes, I'll say yes, definitely. We are doing that. And there are differences between districts that will account for some of the differences you see. For example, Bellevue has an entire building that's empty that they can use for daycare, and they have a levy lid that has allowed them to hire extra folks in each building who are not currently teachers. And so just those two variables alone changed the types of offerings that Bellevue can offer that maybe we can't. Again, we may have some other things that allow us to do some things that other districts can't. So yes, we're doing both, and just know there will be some differences between districts just because of those variables as well.
Absolutely, thanks.
Dr. Stewart? I'm sorry, Director.
Mike, I just want to thank you very much for knowing the information in the update, but I've seen what you're doing, and it's heavy lifting of the heaviest I've ever seen in the last 6 years. You have my total respect, but also my sympathy, because God knows I wouldn't want to do that job. But thank you, Mike, and you tell your staff the same.
Okay, thank you so much, Mike. Really appreciate the work and the presentation as well. The next item on our agenda is the first reading of the budget. But before we move on to our next agenda, going to propose that we take a short recess to give everyone a chance to do whatever they need to do during that short recess. 10 minutes sound okay? I have 7:08 right now, so
7:20?
Reconvene at 7:20. 12 minutes.
Sounds good.
Okay. Okay, so we'll be in recess until 7:20, and when we reconvene, the next item will be the first reading of the 2020-2021 budget. Okay, we're in recess.